Right, so let's kick this off with a spicy one. Why do so many ICAM recommendations get the big fat no? You do the investigation, you map out all the absent and failed defences, dig into the organisational stuff and the sneaky latent conditions, and then the action goes upstairs and just dies. Vanishes like the last sausage at a Bunnings barbecue. First thing to clear up, the real purpose of an ICAM recommendation is not fix the person. It's to close the gaps you found in the chain, the missing barriers, the dodgy procedures, the resourcing and planning issues, the cultural and governance stuff that sat there quietly until something finally went bang. If your recommendation doesn't tie back clearly to an absent or failed defense, or an organisational factor or latent condition in your analysis, leaders will smell that weakness straight away. Even if they can't explain it nicely, they just feel like this doesn't connect.
Now, why do they reject them? A big one is cost. You propose, say, a big guarding upgrade, or new tech, or extra crews, and the leader's doing the mental math. CapEx budget, production targets, ROI, all that. If all they see is a price tag, not a risk reduction, the answer leans no. Then you've got strategic misalignment. You might be pushing for a control room redesign, but the business is all in on a totally different strategy this year. If your action doesn't hook into those existing priorities, it feels like a side quest, so it slides.
Another killer is human error thinking. If the leader's story in their head is, well, Bob's stuffed up, just retrain him, any recommendation that points at system change feels overcooked. That's where Cam's voice always rings in my ears. He'd say something like, if the solution is be more careful, you haven't understood the problem. When leaders see it as a people problem, they bat away system fixes because, in their world, the system's fine, the human misbehaved.
Then you've got weakly written actions.
Stuff like, improve communication or review procedure. Mate, what does that even mean? Who's doing it? By when? What's the acceptance criteria? Vague equals optional. Leaders don't want to sign up to something they can't picture and can't measure, so they quietly knock it back or send it into the long grass.
Fear of accountability is another one we don't talk about enough.
If a recommendation puts a spotlight on a big structural issue, like chronic understaffing, a manager might be thinking, if I sign this, I'm admitting we've run unsafe for years. That's uncomfortable. In a weak, just culture, people protect themselves first, learning second. Cam would call that a clash between learning and blame. The investigation's trying to learn, but the governance environment still smells like blame, so people duck.
Layer on cultural resistance and fatigue.
Maybe they've seen waves of past recommendations that were overcooked or impossible, so now anything new gets treated like white noise. Or they're just tired. Every event, another 10 actions. Leaders start thinking, if I say yes to all this, my team will never do their real job again. So the default slowly shifts from yes unless to no unless you absolutely corner me.
So when you put it all together, cost, misalignment, human error stories, weak actions, fear of being on the hook, and plain old fatigue, what you see is this tension between what we say about just culture and what we actually do. Are we genuinely trying to learn and fix the system, or are we protecting the current setup and nudging blame onto individuals? If your recs keep being knocked back, it's not just about the wording. It's a window into those deeper, incompatible goals.
Alright, so if no keeps showing up, what's it actually telling you about the culture and the way the place is governed? Because it's not random. Repeated rejection is like your organization quietly holding up a mirror and saying, this is how decisions really get made around here. Let's start with decision-making culture. If ICAM actions that touch systems or resourcing get blocked, but quick fixes about people and paperwork sail through, that screams, we prefer low-friction, low-cost answers. It tells you who really has power in the room and what stories they believe about risk. Is safety a genuine constraint on decisions, or just something you mention after the decision's already made?
Then there's psychological safety.
If a manager says no, but doesn't feel safe to say why, you get these vague reasons. Not the right time, or we'll manage through supervision. Nobody wants to admit, we're not willing to fund this, or if we did this properly, we'd have to change our production plan. That reluctance to name the real trade-offs is a psychological safety issue at the leadership level. They're scared of how it looks on paper. I'll give you a simple story. A site identifies a guarding issue on an old conveyor. The ICAM shows the design is from the dark ages. People routinely defeat the guard to clear blockages, and supervision basically relies on trust. Recommendation? Install modern interlocked guarding and redesign the chute to reduce blockages. Leadership says no. Too expensive. Too much downtime. We'll reinforce the rules instead. 6 months later, same conveyor, different person, same kind of event. Now the rejected recommendation shows up as a repeat incident, and suddenly the question is, why didn't we act when we knew? That's governance maturity in the spotlight. Another one, staffing levels. The ICAM shows chronic short staffing leads to corners being cut, double shifts, skip checks, mental overload. Recommendation is to increase baseline staffing or adjust workload. It gets rejected because there's a hiring freeze. What happens? The workload doesn't disappear. It lands harder on the same people. You start seeing more near misses, burnout, maybe sick leave spikes. The original no quietly drives a bunch of new problems downstream. So what does that tell you? 1. Repeated rejection of system fixes is a huge signal that governance is more reactive than proactive. Decisions are being made to keep things running short-term, gambling that the risk won't materialize. 2. Every no chips away at credibility. Frontline folks see recommended fixes blocked and think, why bother reporting? Nothing happens unless someone gets seriously hurt or the regulator turns up. Cam would frame it as this gap between the slogan and the system. The slogan is, safety is number one. The system is, capital goes to productivity, risk is tolerated if it's quiet, and recommendations that bite too hard get stalled. When that pattern shows up in your ICAM actions over and over, you're basically looking at an X-ray of your culture and governance. It's not just about this one incident anymore. It's telling you how your organization habitually trades off safety, cost, and reputation. And there's a regulatory angle too. If an event repeats and there's a paper trail showing you had a solid recommendation on the table that was rejected, regulators and boards start asking some very tough questions. The risk isn't just another incident. It's legal exposure, shareholder scrutiny, and trust damage. So every no isn't just a local decision. It's a governance data point, a clue about whether your oversight is real or just looks good in the annual report. So where does that leave the poor investigator or safety pro who keeps watching their hard work get canned? It's tempting to throw your hands up, but there's a bunch you can actually do to tilt the odds towards yes, or at least turn no into proper learning instead of quiet frustration. First move is tightening the chain from finding to recommendation. Don't just say, we should upgrade X. Spell out, here's the absent or failed defense we found. Here's the organizational factor or latent condition behind it. And here's how this specific action closes that gap. Almost like a 3-link sentence. Because we observed A and B, which create risk C, we recommend D, which will reduce C by doing E. It sounds a bit nerdy, but it makes the logic visible. Then quantify where you can. You don't need a PhD model, just plain numbers. This exposure happens 30 times a shift. Or, we've had 4 similar near misses in 12 months. Or, if this fails, credible harm is permanent disability. Tie that to benefit. Reduction in exposure. Fewer stoppages, less rework. Talk in terms of risk exposure, resilience, reputation, language that fits how the business already thinks. Options are your friend. Instead of one giant recommendation that's easy to reject, offer phased or tiered actions. For example, Option A, immediate low-cost tweak. Option B, medium investment with bigger risk reduction. Option C, long-term redesign. You're still clear about which option best addresses the risk, but you're giving leaders a structured choice rather than a yes-no trap.
Engage leaders early too. Don't disappear for 6 weeks and then surprise them with a 40-page report and $5 million worth of actions.
Pull them into the sense-making. Here's what we're seeing so far. Does this match your experience? If this pattern is real, what scale of response would you consider reasonable? You're building ownership before the recommendation is even written. Tool-wise, I really like review before reject practices. Something like, if a recommendation is going to be declined, it has to go through a short, documented review, maybe with safety, operations, and finance in the same conversation. No silent vetoes. And an acceptance matrix or register helps track what was accepted, modified, or rejected, with the rationale and the residual risk noted. Over time, that register becomes gold. You can see patterns in what gets blocked and why.
When you're in the room, strip out the heavy safety jargon.
Instead of, we must implement a higher order control, try, right now, we're depending on people noticing and reacting in time. This action moves the risk control earlier in the chain, so we're less dependent on perfect human performance. Same idea, different wardrobe. You're translating from safety speak to business speak.
And if the answer is still no, this is where CAM's take is really sharp.
Treat rejection as data, not just defeat. Document what was recommended, what was rejected, who made the call, and the residual risk that remains. You're not being dramatic, you're just making the trade-off visible. If the event, or something close, happens again, there's a clear record of the choice that was made.
There's a moral layer here too. When you calmly lay out, here's the risk, here's what we could do, here's what happens if we do nothing, you're basically asking leaders, can you live with this decision if we're back here in 6 months with a worse outcome? That's not a threat, it's an honest governance question. And if they still choose to carry the risk, at least the organisation isn't lying to itself about it. All right, I'll park it there. If your ICAM recommendations are getting smashed, don't just sharpen your elbows, sharpen your logic, your language, and your learning mindset. Every no is telling you something about the system you're working in. In future episodes, we'll dig into how to surface those patterns without becoming the most unpopular person in the building. Until then, go easy, look after your crews, and remember, even a kangaroo could trip over this stuff. So make the ground a bit safer.